Okay, so during this lesson we're going to look at counter objects. So I'm going to insert a counter object by going up to the insert menu and choosing new object. And now I go to the data section and we can insert a counter. Now we get the plus and we can just click to insert it. And I'll make this a little bit bigger. Okay, so now we have a counter object. This object is used to display numbers. It can display them in different types of ways, such as bars, or just regular numbers, or as text, or animations, or it can even be hidden. So first we're going to look at the numbers. And I'm going to insert a few buttons so that we can manipulate this counter using the buttons. So let's go to interface and choose button, and I'll insert this button and I will clone it across a few times. I'm not sure how many we'll need yet. Here we go. Okay, so first we'll make this button. We'll make this button add to the counter. So this first button that we've made is going to add to the counter. So what we have to do is we can just go to our frame editor of frame 1, and then we can say when this button is clicked, then we will add to counter, and then we can choose a number, and I'm just going to choose 1. And so now if we go back here, now we can see if we click this button, it's going to add 1 to the counter. So I'm going to test this by running the frame. Now we can see when we click this, it's adding to the counter. Each time you click, it adds 1. So I'm going to close this. I forgot to name all our buttons, so I'm going to do that. We'll name this add. And then this one, we're going to make it subtract now. So we can just change the name of this to subtract. And then we'll change the text on it to subtract from counter. Now we have this button that will subtract from the counter, so we just got to go into the event editor and we will find our subtract button, and when the button is clicked, then we will subtract from counter. And now we get this dialog. We can enter in 2 this time. I'll make it subtract 2 and then press OK. So now if we test this frame, now we see we can add to the counter still using this, and then when we click this, it'll subtract 2 from the counter each time. And we can even go into negative numbers. One thing that we can do is if we look in our properties over here, we can set a minimum value. So say we set this to 0. Then when we test our frame, then I can still add, but when I subtract, it's not going to go past the 0 because our minimum value is set to 0. The same thing goes for our maximum value. So if I change this to 10 and then I run our frame, then I can add until I get up to 10, and then once I click, it won't do anything anymore. We can also change our initial value here to any number that's within our minimum and maximum value. So I can change this to 5, and then when we run our frame, it'll start it will start at 5. So now we'll look at our next type. One more thing, we can, see this image is here, we can choose edit, and then we can edit our numbers if we want to here. Okay, so now let's go on to our vertical bar. We can change this to vertical bar and see we get this bar that we can make vertical like this. Okay, now I have a vertical bar. We can choose our fill type for this bar. We can choose a gradient. Then I'll make this a vertical gradient like that. And now we can now run our application, and we can see now if we add to the counter, it's adding more onto the bar, and it's adding to the top because we have it selected to count up. We can change it to count down, and now when we run our frame, we can see that adding will bring it down farther. The same thing goes for a horizontal bar. If we go like that, now we have a horizontal bar. I'm going to stretch this so it looks more horizontal. And now if we run our frame, then we can see that if we add, it will add it horizontally to the right side, and subtract will subtract it. Then we can change this to from right. That way we can add, and it will add on to the left side, so it's counting from the right over. Now we have animation. This will just insert an animation as your counter. Then we can change it to text like this, and we can see that this is a little bit almost the same as the numbers, but now this is text and in fonts. So we can, now we still have these same controls here, but we can do more with these buttons in the event editor since it's now text. So I'm going to make this button. This button will, how about we make this button, we can make this change font. And then here we can make this called change font. Okay. So now if we go into our event editor, then we can say that if the change font button is clicked, then we want to text, set font name, and then inside of quotations we have to type in a font. I'm just going to choose Calibri. And now, so if this button is clicked, it's going to change it to Calibri. So now we can see that we click the change font button and we can see it change the font to Calibri. We can do other things with buttons, as you see here. We can set font size, set bold, set italic, set underline, set strikeout, and set the text color. So we're going to look at all of those now. So let's go back to our frame editor. This one, we're going to make it change the font size. So I'll name this change size, and then here we'll call it change font size. Okay, and now into the event editor we can say if change size is clicked, then we can change font size, and let's put in a different font. I'll choose 24. and now we can enter 1 to resize the object and 0 to keep current size. I'm going to put in 1, and now we can go back to frame 1, and now we can see that this button will make this font change to a bigger size, like that. Now we can see, let's go back into our frame editor for a second and see what happens if we're going to keep it at 24, but then what happens if we enter 0 here. If we leave that at 0, then we can see that if we test it, then it's going to it's not going to enlarge the window of the object. This area here, it's not enlarging that like it did when we put in 1 at that part. You could see it a little bit better if we edited this and made this like 50, and then we kept it at 0. Now if we run it and we change font size, we can see that it didn't bring the window up like it did when we put in 1. So now let's look at our next one, which will be set bold. So let's go back to the frame editor, and we'll make this button bold. And now we can see that if we find our bold button, then if the bold button is clicked, then we want to set bold, and to turn off the bold we'll put in 0. To turn it on we'll put in 1. So this button's going to turn it off, and then we'll go back to frame 1, and then we'll make one more button that will turn off our bold button, that will turn off our bold on the text. So let's change this to bold off, and the text will be turn off bold. And now we can go into our frame editor, and if our turn off button, bold off button is clicked, then we can right click here to go to text, and we can set our bold and choose 0. So now this button is going to turn our bold on, this button is going to turn our bold off. So if we test our frame, then we can see this button made it bold, and then if we click this, it's going to turn off the bold. All the rest of these text options here are very similar to the bold ones, so we're not going to go over each of these. That's all for this tutorial.